dance, when we dance, when we dance. And then he looked and he said, I don't know that it's when we dance anymore. I think we have to think about changing the title. But certainly dance as a coming together of people, coming together of spirits, coming together physically, being in touch with the earth, being in touch with the sky, and everything around you is something, and knowing a lot of dancers, not only Atrice, but some of Michael's other models were in the dance program at Howard and have continued to maintain their interest in dance. So it's always been an event, and those of you who have partied with Michael, whether it's at Southern Graphics Council's meetings or any other context, or if you've come to our homes, at some point, somebody's going to get up and shake a leg. And so there's also that point of reference for it. And I think that looking at not only this body of work, but thinking about the work that I have seen Michael do over, the years that we've been together, that has been the coming together, the celebration of life and of death, and celebration of living has been something that's been a constant for him.
Beautiful, thank you. And your poems, they walk us through the imagery of the exhibition, but also through the journey of travel that you all took, especially in Australia on 2 occasions. So how has this body of work evolved in reference to those 2 trips?
Well, the first time we went to Australia, we wanted to see it all, and so Australians, particularly with whom we would speak when we said we wanted to go to Sydney, and we were going to Cairn, we were going to see Darwin, and then we were going to go to Perth, and we had to go to Melbourne, because that's the big printing center there. They would just look at us and smile. And so we ended up doing basically the equivalent of DC, New York, and perhaps Boston when we went on the first trip. But it was an experience of seeing so many new things, from seeing the kangaroos hopping alongside the train rides, and not a person in sight until you came to a train station. And then only if someone was being met on the train did you see another human being. But the sense of isolation and this vast landscape that can't help but leave a mark on people. And then reading and, seeing movies, having seen movies about Australia and about the Aboriginal population. And then the second time that we went, we actually had close contact with some Aboriginal people. And that was kind of the goal that we had gone there for, in a sense, even though we had been invited to exhibit. And I was telling someone earlier that it's a bit like sort of people who come to the States and they say, well, we're really interested in American Indians, we really want to see American Indian culture. And they stay maybe on the East Coast, or they're in an area where there aren't any museums. So it was a coming together of all of those, factors, trying to put it together. And then the evolution, as I see it, when the first body of work that Michael did when we came back from Australia in 2012 was probably shown at the On Floor exhibit, maybe in 2014, and perhaps 2015. And then we had an opportunity to go again in 2014, and that was when we got a chance to explore the North Coast. And you had easier access to the Aboriginal population. You saw them, these people more on the streets. And then when we got back to Sydney, after going to the North Coast and going to the Tiwi Islands and seeing the wonderful museums that were just absolutely amazing, then that was when we had the experiences of walking in the street, and all of a sudden you notice, oh, yeah, okay, you, and probably you, okay. And it was reciprocal, because that was something that I remember from a kid traveling with my parents in Mexico. They had been there in the 40s. We as a family went in the 50s. And my mother and my aunt would always go in like this. Did you see? Person of color, person of color, person of color. And there was this, and it was an aspect of travel that I think most people don't have unless they've been in the reverse situation, where you're looking for someone who looks like some member of your family or somebody that you know or somebody who somebody knows that you know, and finding yourself in this common ground. And from that, I think the artwork that comes and the words that come have an additional layer. I mean, Michael works in layers, many different layers. And so this was one in terms of the personal experience, in terms of our experiences with travel. He was always taking photographs of textures. And with the textures, he would layer them and layer them and layer them. And the more you layer, I guess, is with anything, you know, life, relationships, food. The richer it gets, the more intense the experience. And it tends to draw you in because you think you see a little piece of something here. No, it's not it. You go elsewhere. But that's the overall experience.
Yeah. There was something special you said, or that struck me, that you described when you were circling in the airplane before landing, Uluru, and the red dirt. And Professor Platt said,
Michael said, this is just like Georgia. And it turned out that we were sitting, you know, 3 seats. So Michael had the window, I had the middle, and there was an Australian person at the end. And he turned out to be the son of the family that had the camel concession, because the camels are, of course, in Australia for desert. And we had not spoken at all during this trip, and here we're getting ready to land. And he said, yeah, it hides the blood really well. And that was from someone who was from there. And that was our only exchange. But that remark stayed with me, I think, stayed with Michael. And you know it if you read it, history of colonialism, so on and so forth. But it was a very impactful moment, you know. And then talking to other people, seeing the kinds of exhibitions that were going on in the museums there, where there is a sense that it's important for we as a nation, Australians, Australia as a nation, has an obligation now, I guess if you were to put it in religious terms, to say to repent and do better. And there's clearly, I think, evidence of that on many levels. It's not a completed task, the same as it isn't done here.
Yeah. Wonderful. The red dirt and the dance and many other parallels that bond the human experience, particularly people of color in our oppressive environments, was pretty poignant in that story. So in terms of you all's process, how intertwined are they? Especially in this collaboration.
Okay. This has probably been the show that that Michael and I worked the most on together. I guess there are different levels, different aspects of collaboration. When we first started was with our artist books, and I had a body of work already done, he had a body of work already done. So there it was a matter of saying, do you think this goes with this? And then the second one was a bit more involved. We didn't have it all together initially, and that's been a process with each of the artist books that we've done, certainly. With this particular piece, I've not only asked Michael how he felt about what I was writing, but he asked me more consistently about how I felt. This is probably the most colorful show, I think, that he's done. You'll know the colors are very intense. And also, I think perhaps because he and Jack decided that they would put the pieces on the wall with using the magnets. And so Michael ended up putting a color frame around all of the pieces. But the colors that he used were not colors that I was familiar with him using in his palette over the years. So that was a new element that I found very intense. I remember the first time I went to Southern Graphics Council, it was in Austin, Texas, with Percy, Helen Frederick, and all the printmakers in DC were there, Georgia Neal, I think, who's now elsewhere. But I got left at the booth while we took turns covering the work while people went around and looked at all the other artwork. And I was fine until Percy took off, Michael took off. And then I was doing fine until somebody came up and said, "So, how long do you leave the sugar lift on?" I had no idea what they were talking about, obviously. The other stuff I knew, I had picked up enough that I could speak reasonably about it. So with this show, I feel more confident about making comments about, Michael's work and the process than back then.
Would you say that there's a call and response that was happening between your word and his image in the moment, but also afterwards?
Yes, yeah. I mean, that's when we did the very first book, which was back, I think, 2000 or 2001, we talked about it. He wasn't illustrating my words ever, and I wasn't writing to his images ever. But what we felt was a combination of the back and forth, and setting up some vibrations that seemed to overlap and work. And that's what we tried to continue.
Okay, wonderful. Mr. Beane, I have a question about this rare recording that you were able to locate from 1953. It was titled Tribal Music of Australia and recorded for the Ethnic Folkways Library. What were some of the conversations had as you and Mr. Platt were listening to those recordings and speaking about the cultures?
Well, we spoke a lot about, or I started the conversation with some remarks about Native American, specifically talking about Indians in Northern California, the way they were through people that I knew who were Native American. And then the conversation leaned towards how Michael was seeing the people from his trips. And we talked a long time about that. And some of it came in the midst of... Okay.
It's on. Just hold it closer to your mouth.
Yeah, thank you.
There you go.
Just happened to be, while we were watching some videos from some Australian TV.
Okay. And I remember you saying something very special about it brought to mind some of the different landscapes that you yourself have traveled and the presence of ancestral spirits that's in the rock, or the veneration of trees, and there being these continuation of life through our landscape.
I saw some commonality in that in some of the travels that I've taken, and some of which have been in remote parts of Ireland or Scotland, Western Islands, and there is this, the earth is important in each case.
Yeah.
The veneration of trees is important, even though some of the memory of that, because it's Bronze Age, goes way back.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Tyler, as an artist who has known Professor Platt since childhood, I understand?
That's right.
That means you've got some stories to tell. So, and you've been a collaborator on many projects and installations here and abroad. So
Yes.
if you could share some of those experiences with us. And
Wow. Michael and I really spent a lot of time together, but
I was always like in awe of what he was doing, you know. And yeah, we developed such a friendship that, you know, I was, you know, right there when he was thinking about art, what he was going to do next, helping him doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we traveled. I mean, I went to London, England with him, and all up and down the East Coast, him and Carol,
Yeah.
you know, and just, you know, really opened me up and exposed me to a lot of things and opportunities I'd have probably never have seen or been able to see through them. Universities, because both of them are educators, and I mean, just places in art. It just, my world was just, you know, consumed with their lives, you know, and it was wonderful, you know, wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, Michael, I could tell you all kinds of stories. I mean, little intimate stories. Maybe some of them I won't, but yeah. Outside of art, though, and maybe I shouldn't go here, but some of the most memorable times I've had with Michael Platt was on fishing trips. He loved to fish. He loved to fish. And so did I. And every spring and summer, we'd make plans. We got to do this summer, you know. And we'd go out. We'd go out on the Chesapeake Bay, or we'd go down to Virginia Beach, you know. And one thing that I happen to think about since he passed in reference to fishing was that because of him, you know, I got to fish with him on both the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, which to me is like rare, you know. But yeah, we've had some major fishing trips. Well, one time we went out off of Virginia Beach out on the ocean and fished for black sea bass, you know, and it was a trip that we didn't know anybody on the trip. It was a bus trip that from a church group, and we said, well, they going, let's go.
Yeah.
Paid our money. Man, but this trip, man, it's like we went in the middle of the night, drove down to Virginia Beach, got on this big boat in the middle of the night, foggy, dark. Again, you know, it was full of a lot of brothers, a lot of older guys, and everything was fine. We made friends. You know, Michael makes friends wherever he goes.
Yes.
I mean, he don't have no problem with that.
Yeah.
And so we did, but we went out on this boat, man, and we rode until daylight. I mean, way out. And we caught so much black bass that day, it was unbelievable. It's one of the best fishing trips we ever were on. That's one of my favorite stories, but there's so many other ones. The night we went to Solomon Island and fished all night long and caught bluefish.
Yeah.
I mean, big fish,
Yeah.
you know, it was.
Well, that makes me think about, just in terms of fellowship, the kitchen table of your all's home. And that's where I met you, and that's where I met many a mentor, including Mr. Harley Little, who is also an ancestor, but also truly influential in so many artists' vision and careers. And but that was the gravitational force, you know, fellowshipping over food, laughing and talking, sharing ideas, showing what interested you and something new you read that really taught so many of us, and a lot of us younger people. It was a privilege to sit and listen to you all speak. So, and just in terms of some of the artwork that you all created together, and when I think of Professor Platt, I think of that sparkle in his eye when he saw something that was really different and was really intriguing. And so have you kind of seen that sparkle throughout?
Yes.
You kind of
yeah.
know when he's got the vision.
Yes.
Yeah.
Again, like I was saying, he would always talk to me about ideas, what he wanted to do.
Yeah.
Let's talk about his digital photography, which is new. I mean, over the last 5, 7, 8, 9 years, all before that, Michael was drawing and painting. But he decided to get into digital photography. Well, I was already a photographer. And when you mentioned Holly Little and I were friends as well. But I'm old school, like Holly. And Mike wanted to do this digital stuff. And Mike has always encouraged me to go for it. Like everybody he's ever been with, that's one thing about him that was magical. He never quit on any idea. He might not have got it right the first time, but he continued to work at it until he got it right.
Yeah.
Now, there's one thing that he told me when he started doing digital photography. He didn't mind taking the pictures, and he didn't mind painting the models. But sitting down at that computer was a whole nother ball game.
Yeah.
He said, man, I can't get the image to come out the way I see it. And I'm saying, well, what's the problem? I have to figure out this computer.
Yeah.
And he would. I mean, he studied, and he pushed buttons, and he found out what would happen until eventually he began to make images based on where he saw them in his head. And he told me that. He said, after, it was roughly around 2 years, he told me, he said, man, I finally got it. And I knew what he meant, So, yeah. He never gave up on trying to accomplish and work with new ideas, new technologies, just something brand new. He never liked repetition, or old work. Always something fresh, always something new, all the time.
Right. And he said something to that effect a number of years ago when talking to him about his process. And, he was saying that he likened it to one of the blues singers, Tom Waits. And he said, oh goodness, something to the effect of, in order to receive the song, you got to be ready for it. And that was the practice and the discipline in something of getting back on the horse, getting back at the computer, trying.
Yes.
And it will come. It's not just going to happen upon you and gifted to you.
Right.
If I could say something, that's something that I remember Michael and Harley talking about. And Michael, for those of you who have the catalog, the photograph from Michael is not a recent one, but it's one that was done by our friend Harley Little, which was a very important person and image, for Michael. So but Harley would tell Michael when they'd be talking about photography, and I guess it works the same. He said, you don't go after something, you wait for it to come to you. And Harley was one of the photographers whose eyes told him when the subjects were ready to give themselves to him. So
Subjects and light.
Yes,
Those two could see light in a way that I've never seen another human being. Mr. Harley, as I would call him, he wore glasses, but he would take his glasses off and be able to squint to focus and see clearer than any glass could create, to see exactly where the light is and how things needed to be focused. And Professor Platt the same way. I mean, they knew exactly from which direction light was coming in any environment they took, and they were able to manipulate light in such an interesting and beautiful way that was truly kind of a spiritual thing. Mr. Davis, I mean, you have so much history and knowledge of Washingtonian artists, and certainly Professor Platt stands out among them. What are some of the major shifts and evolutions that you witnessed, and what did he kind of insert differently to DC art?
Yeah, Michael was definitely an ultimate image maker, and I met him when he was doing printmaking. And like Dwight had mentioned, he started to work with the digital photography and digital images. And what I most enjoy in talking with him, because we used to go over there and we used to, of course, had a lot of shows and so forth, was his vision. He actually was an ultimate vision maker. And so he created images that, and I've told many people this, that you would never ever see. We were talking about, his ability to actually see, and it was about the spirit, and about, he was searching for spirits, and he was searching for things. So he made images, but they were more importantly made to actually heighten our awareness of things. The figure was his primary goal. I mean, to create a figure and work with the figure and like painting the models. And I know this was a rich experience that I never had a chance to view, but the after effects of how did you come up with this? How long were you, this been in your mind, body, and soul? And so what I saw and how he created made him a unique individual to the Washington community. So I've worked with many Australian and Aboriginal artists as well. I brought them to the gallery and brought them here. And the vision that they had, because of being out in the desert or being in a place that is alone in spirit field, Michael was searching for that and found it. And so to the Washington community, he created something that was totally new. I mean, not just in the Washington community, but I would say in the nation, and how he, re-imaged the image to the point where it became something new and innovative. And that was his search, and that was his goal. And he definitely continued to do that all along the way. And I agree, he never ever gave up in terms of, finding it out and figuring these things out. So yeah, we had a chance to do a lot of different things together as far as that's concerned, yeah.
Wonderful. And I'm glad you mentioned the spirit, and I would like to bring Ms. Maisha Atrice into the conversation, because as a model, you embody the spirit that he was creating and showing to us. And so I'm wondering, number one, from your perspective, what was his process like, experiencing it as a model? But then, two, was there a transportation happening, a departure from this realm into the spiritual realm in the midst of that process?
So what I remember of the process was music, the kitchen table, Carol Beane being in the background somewhere, always, and him working to get the paint to a temperature that's comfortable for the model, myself. And I looked at his tools as ritualistic, because he didn't just use a regular paintbrush, but it's, the fine hair, and it's got this wooden, beautiful carved wooden handle, and again, he's heating up the paint to make sure that we're comfortable, and then working to make the model as comfortable as possible, because I'm standing in the middle of your kitchen naked right now, and that can be a little awkward. So the process for me began there, right? And then moving into the studio space, and he's still just talking about all the things. I think what I remember most about Michael, now that I've had time to reflect since his transition, is that he's a consummate teacher. And that's to everyone, every generation. Dwight is his peer. He has elders, and I'm certainly a child, but he was teaching everyone always about something. And so the conversations about life were happening in that space. And then his focus with me in particular was my gaze, my eyes. So we were talking about that, like what it conjured up for people outside of an artistic space where you're not necessarily able to utilize a deep stare, but what it means to him as he's taking this picture and where he's able to go with it. And then taking a beat throughout the session to go and analyze the pictures on the computer and determine if he's gotten what he's looking for, if we need to go back into that space. And like Carol said, I hadn't heard of him taking a picture for a particular purpose, but being moved to take pictures to gather them so that when the Spirit moved him to create with whatever textures he had, that piece would already be there, that figure is already there. And as his former student, I remember, I'll say this briefly, in class, I was already over it. It was my last semester at Howard. If anyone knows Howard, you know why I was over it. And so I'm sitting there, and the professor is late, and so I'm talking shit. And then I hear a harmonica, and I'm like, what in the fuck is happening? And then this big old black man with a lock walks in the room, blowing a harmonica. I'm like, no way, this is my professor. It's not humanly possible that this is my professor. And he walked in, very casual, nonchalant. He said, there is no syllabus. I want you to go out, take 100 pictures of textures, and meet me at my house. And then he walked out. He had strong feelings about textures. He had very, very strong feelings about textures. He had strong feelings about sending his students out to explore the nuances of the macro. And it really opened my eyes up to that as well. And then another story is walking to his house and knocking on the door for the first time, because he was so kind to open up his house to give us the resources that Howard was not able to offer at that time. So he was opening his home so that we had access to the printer, to the machinery that wasn't on campus. But knocking on that door and then having my Spanish professor open the door and me being like, ooh, I am at the wrong door. I'm sure I had skipped her class for that day. Yeah, so, they both opened the door with the most kindness, and I myself as a photographer got to see the value of not just the textures, but the layers and how you can create from that. And so over time, watching him use all these different sessions that we had and putting them in different environments with multitude of textures was always very interesting for me. No, I personally had not traveled there, but I could see him in the creation process, his mind moving a million miles per minute.
Amen to everything he said. And would you agree that the textures were also a mode of time travel? The textures and layers, because the more aged a surface was, the more attractive it was, and the more history and the more stories it had or it had to receive. So I certainly.
Yeah, I think I've been deeply moved by how he was able to bring his travels back through the pictures. Mm-hmm. The environments that we would seemingly dismiss as abandoned, rotten, mm-hmm. became portals for the spirit worlds. And I remember seeing the images, was it from Paris or London, when he's doing the Dreams series? You know what I'm talking about, Carol? It's the top of the buildings.
Oh,
is that
there, yeah.
London? Paris. And I remember how refreshing that was, because I was so used to him using like the damp, rustic, worn spaces, but that was new. And either way, it had the same impact of he went somewhere and saw it for the first time and decided to bring it back definitively and then place the models in that space. And So I like to think that when you travel, the reason why there's any type of jet lag is because your soul is trying to catch up to your physical body. And I think that with those images, he was able to capture that actual experience of your soul going to a different space and coming to this new one. And then adding those textures is about his lived experiences. And then you add Carol's words on top of it, and then you have just literally a whole lived experience within an image, which is, you know, unparalleled.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm wondering if Mr. Jermaine Ashman is present. I had a question for him. Well, maybe you all might have some insights, and it's about the sculptural installation. And you mentioned music being, you know, kind of omnipresent, but I know music, particularly towards the end of his design process of the installation, was very special. And Shante Gates, who put together the soundscape to go along with it, pointed out a song he had been listening to, I understand, kind of over and over. So I found the song and brought some words with me, but hopefully you can expand on it. And it's by Sean Rowe, and it goes, "My friends, I believe we are at the wrong fight, and I cannot read what I did not write. I've been to his house, but the master is gone, but I'd like to leave something behind." And it was very poignant all throughout the song of a striving towards better, towards more. But if all I can do is leave something behind, that is a task that I can feel proud in doing.
I think that was a song that Michael discovered really just before we went to bed the night before he died. And that was also when we'd spent the afternoon in the gallery, so he's been able to see some of the pieces up on the wall and the other people's placed. And when he and Jack walked through it, they were both grinning more broadly each time, which was also very nice and very satisfying. And then Michael went home and he said, just before we were going to bed, he said, "I don't think the square is right," because the 9 houses that you see in the installation, that was there, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. And he said, "I think circle works better." And so he sat down at the table and he did that sketch. And so then we came in Tuesday after, he was no longer there, and worked to put it together. And then he had found this song, which he must have played 3 or 4 times, but he was also, I was doing some other things, and he was just sitting at the table listening to this song over and over again. And I think that's something that all of us, whether we're in the arts or not, but we all want to leave something behind. We try to leave something behind, whether it's with our friendships, our relationships, the work that we do, the words that we create. That's a goal. And for Michael, I know the opportunity to show here at the Katzen, and especially given his long friendship with Jack, was a special opportunity. So I'm glad that did come to pass. And so there was that song, then there was the song by the Aboriginal singer also. I don't know the words to those because they were in his language, and I didn't read the program notes. And then Glenn had found the record, as you heard him tell, that had this very haunting rhythms and melodies to it too. And Shante, who's not here, had put them all together. So again, the influence of different elements, different aspects of life, even of the same genre of arts came together. And then the connections, the influences, connections that we ended up with as the title instead of When We Dance, have a special meaning now that Michael's not here. We're all here, and the artwork is here. And there are all connections between us and between people from Nova back when Michael first started teaching, and students from Howard, like Treese, who's been out for a little while, and more recent ones. This is a network. This is life. Mm-hmm. So.
And we are one mob.
Yes.
Please tell us about the word mob and the meaning.
Mob is a word that we learned in Australia, has the meaning of one group. We are together. And of course, it's not to say that the Aboriginal community in Australia is a monolithic community, by no means, but there's a sense of identity that we found in what we saw and the people that we talked with, both Aborigine people and non-Aborigine people, that is a word that they have taken and have made their own, and that's how they refer to themselves. Possibly not all, probably not all, but a good enough number to have a cultural weight. Mm-hmm. And so there was sometimes it was in graffiti, and sometimes with sort of like, go back to your homelands, you people who were here well before we came, ignorance. And then there was one mob said with great pride and dignity and respect. So we saw both of those uses.
Yeah, and I see the universals that he found between peoples across very many seas and lands. He kind of wove us back together, you know, across those differences as one mob, one human family. I think that it might be a great time to transition into a question and answer period, but if I may ask the question to the audience, if artists and colleagues, how has Michael Platt influenced your work and thought?
Yeah, my name is Joel Crooms. I'm a new artist to DC, and the brother was like a lightning bolt, okay? I do digital art, and as an artist that's trained, you know, classically painting, all of that, like my man said, you had to discover it and work with a computer, and you find yourself, everything you said I could relate to. You had to create your own vocabulary, like a painter has his colors and palette, stuff like that. In digital photography, because it's new, you find yourself creating. When I saw his work, I got a new hip at Howard, and I was in the hospital, so I couldn't get to see him. But when I saw that work, I told everybody, I said, I got to meet this guy, I got to meet this guy. And I didn't, but I see his work, and I know where he's going. And as a result of that, I know where I'm going too. So that's all.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Donald McCrae, and I'm an artist, and I'm living here in DC. And as Dwight was saying, I've known Mike a long time myself. And being a printmaker, I'm always drawn to printmakers. And I'm emotional now just talking about him. About a week before he passed, I saw him in the Whole Foods on P Street. And I was like, Mike, I'm having a problem with this print that I've been working on for like years. And he was always a wealth of information. He's like, well, Don, you need to do this, that, whatever. And I would be like, wow, this guy is just incredible, because he's always thinking that way. And Dwight's the same way, and so is Tim. So just being around him was always a motivational factor for me. And as a printmaker, you always are drawn to, you want to be the best. So if you want to be the best, you're drawn to the best. And just for me, just knowing him for the amount of years will always be a blessing for me forever. And thank you.
Thank you.
Slow to raise my hand. I'm not an artist. I met a friend of Michael's and got drawn into your community, and it's been a blessing. My experience of Michael, since I met you all after he passed, has been his spirit. It's such a tangible experience, though, that I wanted to share that. I do have a question. The friend of Michael's that I met said that his medium, I asked him what his medium was, he is an artist, and he said his medium was light. That kind of blew me away. And then I met another person who said that his medium was light, space, and time. Boom. And again, I'm thinking, who are these people? And then I went home and I got on the computer to Google, which is my way of dealing with the world, and looked up art medium, light, space, and time, and bam, there's a whole thing about that. Now, I'm not an artist, so I wouldn't know that. Perhaps it's not unusual for all of you, but it is absolutely mind-blowing for me. And then to hear you speak of the spirit and grasping the spirit, moving through whatever it is you're painting, my question is, light, space, and time, do you regard these as ways of capturing, using the mediums of light, space, and time, do you regard these as ways of capturing the spirit in whatever it is you are representing artistically? I'll leave that alone. That's as far as I can go with that, because my mind continues to be blown by just the concept.
I think definitely all those three are combinations, and time is a huge important part of everything, because Michael probably spent more time with his work than anything. And artists do that. I mean, they spend lifetimes just creating. And you never forget about that, because wherever that you go, you're thinking about a piece that you're already working with, or art piece that you're working with. So time becomes a very important part of how that piece is going to come out. And the experiences that you're going through also. That's the purpose, yeah.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
I mean, I agree, but you said, Mr. Davis, time, space, and light are three things that humankind will always and have always experienced. And, you know, artists do capture moments of all three coming together in such a way that would communicate to someone infinitely before them and infinitely after them what they were experiencing. And that's a commonality that we can share, you know, of what it means to be a human being, to have feeling, to feel connected to their earth and their environment. And so time captured in work can be in that instant, in that historical moment, but at the same time it can be a timelessness of, you know, how we have and how we will always move through time in space, and we can experience it and know it because of the light that touches our eyes.
If I may add,
Yes.
light, space, and time, and storytelling. Light, space, and time, and storytelling. You have a very clear path into Michael's perspective on life and his travels and the condition of people based on his capturing of those three elements. But for me, what I've always walked away with when looking at his images is a story.
All right. I remember seeing a hand.
Michael was my teacher. Michael was my teacher at Northern Virginia Community College back in the 80s. And, there's so many stories to tell. Like you, here came this guy walking in playing a harmonica. It was like, whoa. And he had a magic about him that I felt every time I was around him. I had him for drawing, I had him for printmaking, and I used to think, how does this man teach? He's not teaching like anybody else teaches, but there was just something about just being around him and watching him. He was always there if you needed his help, but he let you go. You know, he let you go and he encouraged where you were going. Michael Platt's students' work in the hall never looked the same. It looked like you and you. You know, and that magic was something, every time I was around Michael, I couldn't wait to get home to my studio and work. He just, it rubbed off. And when I was at Nova, I had had a degree in English and I was taking classes at Nova and I felt like I'm home. I found what I really want to do. And I had a drawing in the hall from another class, and he came up and he said, "Is that yours?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, when are you going to graduate school? And I said, what? I had no confidence to do anything like that. And I said, are you serious? And he said, yeah, I'll support you. And he did. He wrote the letters to the University of Maryland, and I went, and that was one sentence that changed my life from a very, very special man. And that was the magic of Michael.
Absolutely. Hi, I'm Carrie Kamikaze Williams. I am one of his faithful mentees. Been heartbroken for a minute. I'm from Howard. So, you know, at Howard, since we were using his own studio, you had to roll up your sleeves. Hell, I just brought an extra set of scrubs, which I think are still hanging in your basement. Because you got to get dirty with art. You know, that's when I'd make a picture and I just think it was fantastic. And I came to Howard to do photography, and by the time that I finished one class, I no longer wanted to do that. I wanted to be a printmaker. And all of my art, I always thought was finished, and he said, oh, baby girl, you're just starting. That's just one layer. You got to put your fingerprint on that. You have to bring more to that. And I was confused after that. It took me at least 3 more semesters. I tried to take every class he had just to make sure that I could stay near my mentor, you know, to keep that flame alive, to keep your mind open. He made me rearrange all the furniture in my house just so I could do art where I felt like I should, you know, and carry it with you. You know, he never, you know, the whole idea of taking it and keeping it in your pocket, you know, on a camera wasn't it. It was letting it breathe after you've captured it. And he taught me I could capture it in anything. I didn't need the best camera. I didn't need to be the best artist. I had to combine everything I know and be open for the things I didn't know. That was Platt. And then teamed up with you, well, that was my master's program right there in the house. I haven't had to pay Howard anymore since. Thank you very much.
I came to Michael via Carol. I used to teach with her at Howard, along with we taught a class together.
Hold it up to your mic, and that's it, to your
We taught a
mouth.
class together.
Right up to your mouth.
Is that all right?
No, yeah.
Is that better? Yeah. All right. I said I came to Michael via Carol. Used to teach a class together with Dr. Sifok at Howard University. And he was very different than Carol. And both of them, you know, very charming people. But I have right here a picture addressing what somebody earlier said about space and time. And this one caught my eye when I came, when they had the exhibit on the original day. I'm looking at it. Some of you may see it, may not remember it. This one really captures that topic that she mentioned here. And it caught my eye also. I didn't know about it. That is this older lady, fully dressed, and this younger lady in natural clothing. And the sun is projecting her shadow of the one who is dressed, but not the one who is naked. And then there are overhead, in the bushes in the distance, some still looking things that are flying. And then there's a small caption that reads on there. I can't even read it, but it struck me what I'm trying to remember it. Correct me if I'm wrong. And then
We can't hear you.
and then they came.
We can't hear you.
And then they came in flying canoes. I could, as a professor of literature, I could speak hours on that, just that little caption. That embodies all of that. Time and space right there. Across the centuries, actually. And the shadow contrast between the fully dressed lady, and the one who is in her natural suit. And I could go on that. This, I think, addresses that question. I suggest that you take another look at that particular one. I think you were sitting over there somewhere. There's a small caption on the side. That addresses definitely. But I remember Michael as a bon vivant also. And I cannot miss that little anecdote. I used to call Carol all the time in consultation for our classes that we were teaching together. And he would answer the phone. And knowing that I'm not from here, he used to tease me, I'm going to teach you how to speak black English. So he finally taught me something that I remembered, and I remember that it's pretty easy. He said, don't say what's up, Antonio. Say, sup. So every time I would call him home, and I would say, sup, he wouldn't know it was me. And he would say, hold on tight, I'll get Carol for you. You know, that he put you at ease. He is the kind of person, when you would go to their house, they were the most gracious host. Put you at ease, not only by inviting you, but inviting you also to cook, whatever you want to cook. And that was fun. I have very, very fond memories of Michael. I don't know if you want to say a few words, because we all were very, very closely knit in our teaching and our art and everything.
What was extraordinary was Michael's interaction with children. I mean, this is really memorable. There are two nieces of mine, one who lives in the United States and the other one who lives in Martinique. And when I announced to them that Michael had joined the Ancestors, they sobbed uncontrollably, because to them, Michael was Uncle Michael, who for every occasion during the Christmas time would put together a train that he would run through the entire house. And my two nieces, Ariana and Coretta, were fascinated. They had never, by this train, they had never seen a train of that nature, of that sort. And he would carefully put the train together every Christmas until a certain time, and they would gather around the train and he would play the harmonica. So on behalf of Ariana and Coretta, I want to say that that he touched those very young minds and souls and left an imprint forever.
Hello, I'm Martha Jackson Jarvis. I was a colleague of Michael's. I was not a student. We were students together at Howard University in 1970. That's good enough. And Michael was always this powerhouse of images, new work. My memory is we would break into the fine arts building so we could get locked in so we could work all night long. So we had a strategy. We'd be at a certain door at a certain hour, and then we could get trapped in the studio and we could just stay all night and work. And then from there to WD printmaking workshop, just the legacy of being in Washington, D.C. He was a Washington artist, but he brought the world to Washington with his energy and his creativity. But he was Washington, firmly planted here from Duke Ellington School of the Arts, Howard University, and then all of the Northern Virginia, all of the community that we sit here now. And then magically how Carol Beane and Michael opened their home to become like a university. His spirit will be greatly missed. He's a dear friend, he's a colleague, and he would say, I haven't seen you for a while, Jackson, but I know you're somewhere working. And he's the kind of artist that I know in the wee hours of the night when I'm working and I'm laboring on something, I know I have a partner who's on the other side of town and he's doing the same thing. And Dwight, I know he's calling on you. And Carol Beane, I just wanted to say thank you for your generosity of spirit, because you shared him with the world. How you did that, I'll never know, but you did, and I thank you.
somebody down here in the front.
Helen, if you have a question.
I'm just loving this evening, and thank you, Carol, and everyone, Zoma and Tim, and all of you, Dwight. My question is to Carol, though, because you are a linguist who also waited for the words to come to you. And I would love to know, from your point of view, when you were in Australia, with or without Michael, just what was going on in your own storytelling, and how, as someone who speaks Spanish and teaches Spanish, how that language experience helped you to manifest these beautiful poems. I mean, I go back and read them again and again in the show. And I pay homage to you tonight and would like to know something about that, if you could.
The experience of being in a place where you knew the language that was being spoken 99% of the time is always very comforting, because you don't have to worry about you're going to miss something. But in Australia, there was the experiences that we might fantasize about. When you fantasize about your most perfect trips, you're going to be able to communicate with everybody. You'll have wonderful experiences that you read about, and then in the note at the bottom it will say this person lived with this community for 17 months and was a godfather to this child and cousin or uncle to somebody else in that community. And so what you're seeing is the end result of a long-established friendship or relationship. And that was where the language issue came up. For example, our first time in Uluru, excuse me, the young man who was the interpreter for the elders who were there, the Aboriginal guides, our cultural guides, he had been, he was, I forget from which European country, but he was neither an Australian, he was European, a white European, and he had been in Australia interpreting Japanese and English for a long time, a couple of years. And then in the course of his being there, clearly, he had learned one of the Aboriginal languages of the group that was the center at Uluru, also known as Ayers Rock. And so all of the storytelling, all of the information that you were given or that you acquired was passed through this medium. And having worked as an interpreter and taught interpretation, I'm always very aware of language, both what is spoken and then body language. So there was that minor frustration, but obviously that was what you have, so that was what you take. And sometimes you might think, well, what if this person just made up these stories? Because I have no way of telling. He might have read a book, and maybe he really can't communicate with the people who are there talking. But the language had such a richness to it that I didn't mind not understanding a word. They were, not like you do Romance, you do Spanish, so you can understand a little French, a little Italian, a little Portuguese. No, that was out of the question. And it reminded me of a time when I'd been in Peru, and everyone at the table was speaking Yiddish, and I only knew one word of Yiddish. So I was enjoying their conversation, and then when I threw my word in, which is wuss wuss, which means what, the whole table went dead silent. So you kind of enjoy moments like that. But there was definitely that aspect of being there. I find that I have a tendency not to write unless something really, really is overwhelming in the moment. So I didn't write a lot when I was in Australia. I might write down a phrase, or I might describe as succinctly as possible something that we had seen, or that we'd eaten, or a conversation that I'd overheard, or other experiences. And then when we got back to the States, that was when things began to gel, began to come together. So that was the way in which, I wrote most of the things that I wrote. And feeling, however, the things that I mentioned earlier about how we perceive the Aboriginal population in the larger population, which is what the installation is about. And certainly that red dirt that you will also see as part of the installation, and which Martha has dibs on when the exhibition is over, to do something with. But those were really very key experiences. And so then we came back and I started to write. Sometimes the writing would go in a different direction than I thought, or I would remember, oh, I have those lines that I had started using. I thought I'd use them in another kind of poem, but they're clearly meant to be here.
Thank you.
So we have time for one more question or comment.
Carol, I wonder if you would mind reading one of your poems on page 51, next to The Visit.
One of the things about the visit, and that we learned also in Australia, was that for the people of the northern coast, the Torres Island people, page 51, I'm almost there, the museums, everyone, there's an acknowledgement that for this culture, if a person is deceased, they don't mention their name, and there's no visual representation of them. And so in a certain number of instances of his work, Michael transgressed. He didn't obey that because he was looking always for what to him personally would be visually exciting and then have the content that he was trying to get at. And this is one of them, because the three people in the roof of that particular image, which if you don't have the catalog is the one with the ibis, the Australian ibis, was there. And for those of you who may not know it, Florida Avenue, that we all know and love in Washington, D.C., its original name was Boundary Street. No stranger to boundary streets, we stand before the house on this land of deep wounds where echoes gather and sometimes nightmares, eyes closed, the better to remember your long-gone faces. We are come to witness and for a laying on of hands and visitation.
Thank you, Carol.